We can go ahead and get started, Akshay.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, thank you, Krishna, for that very informative presentation. It was really nice to listen to. Our next presenters are Kavya Pratapa and Dikshita Balaji of Michigan Sahana from the University of Michigan. They will be discussing Tyagaraja Vaibhavam, an exploration of Saint Tyagaraja's noted composition beyond Lord Rama. For those of us watching, please remember to be respectful and make sure your comments and questions are productive and kind to the presenters. If you're on Zoom, use the question and answer function. And if you would like to elaborate, use the raise hand function and we will ask you to unmute. If you are watching the YouTube live stream, please drop your comments and questions in the chat. We will make sure they all get answered. I'm now going to hand it off to our presenters.
Awesome. Thank you, Akshay, for the introduction. Namaskaram, everyone. My name is Kavya. I'm representing Michigan Sahana today. And joining me on the violin is Dikshita Balaji. We are really excited to be a part of Kala Sagara today and presenting on Tyagaraja Vaibhavam. Our presentation today is going to focus on celebrating the celebrated composer, Sri Tyagaraja. And we're going to do a little bit of a close analysis on some of his compositions, very popular compositions that are on other deities apart from Lord Rama. We all consider and know of as Sri Tyagaraja's Ishtadevata or God of fondness. So we will get started without any further ado. And after each composition, we'll take a little pause for any questions. So please feel free to engage with us on this exciting topic. So Sri Tyagaraja was actually born as Kakarla Tyaga Brahmam in the year of 1767. And as I've mentioned previously, he is considered to be one of the most celebrated composers of Carnatic music. And he's also considered to be a part of the Trinity. So alongside his contemporary, Sri Muthuswami Dikshitar and Sri Shyama Shastri, as we saw in the earlier presentation, Sri Tyagaraja is considered to be one of these three Trinities in the idea of composing in Carnatic music. And his compositions are not only vast in volume, but they're also remarkable for their variety and their quality. Compositional quality. And even though many of his compositions reflect upon his utmost bhakti or devotion towards Lord Rama, Sri Tyagaraja has also composed kritis and even musical dramas, such as the Nauka Charitam, that depict at a broader level devotion and faith towards God. And so, as I mentioned in this presentation, we will humbly seek to explore a few well-known and popular compositions of Sri Tyagaraja that do not directly emphasize his bhakti for Lord Vishnu or Lord Rama, but as we will see, the Hari Bhakti is actually still very much present in these compositions. So the first composition that we are going to focus on today is a popular Tyagaraja Kriti, Shri Ganapatini Sevim Parare. This Kriti is typically sung in the Raga Saurashtram, and it's actually considered to be the inaugural Kriti of Sri Tyagaraja's musical drama, Prahalada Bhakti Vijayam. So in addition to Nauka Charitam, he's composed two other musical dramas, and Prahalada Bhakti Vijayam is actually his longest opera that he has written. And it's a completely musical opera. It consists of 5 different acts and is composed of a total of 45 different kritis. And so Shri Ganapatini acts as sort of his invocation to this musical opera. And we see this sort of element present in a lot of other operas as well. So as a parallel point, we will take Sri Narayana Tirtha's Krishna Leela Tarangini. So if we've heard compositions like Madhava Mamava in the Raga Nilambari, that is a composition that is a part of the Krishna Leela Tarangini. And so in that opera, Sri Narayana Tirtha has composed a special kriti in the Raga Nate, Jaya Jaya Swamin, to act as an invocatory kriti for the Lord Ganapati. So in very much the same sense, Sri Tyagaraja is drawing inspiration from that, and Sri Ganapatini acts as that sort of invocatory aspect of this opera. And so the Pallavi of the Skriti itself actually very much sets the invocatory aspect. So we will break down the words. There are only a few words in this Pallavi, but he presents it so beautifully. So the second part of the Pallavi, Shrita Manavulara, is referring explicitly to the devotees. So Manavulara is basically the calling of other devotees to come and participate in this worship of Sri Ganapatini. So Sevimpa in Telugu here, he's using it as a form of worship. So, and Rare is explicitly asking everybody to come. And of course, Shri Ganapatini refers to praying to the Lord Ganapati. So in just these 4 words, he's essentially asking devotees to come and participate in the celebratory worship of Shri Ganapati. And so we will now sing this Pallavi to demonstrate how beautifully he brings this invocatory aspect to the Kriti. Shri Ganapati Sevim Parare Shri Ganapati Sevim Parare Shri Ganapati Sevim Parare And we see this sort of invocatory aspect continuing throughout the Kriti. And so in the Charana, we actually see a transition where Sri Tyagaraja is emphasizing the aspect of bhakti and devotion to the celebration of divine worship. And so we'll talk about the Charana here before singing the Charanam. But the very first few words of this Charana, Panasa Narikela di Jambu, is actually referring to all of the different offerings that devotees are bringing in this grand celebration as we're welcoming Lord Ganapati. So Panasa is referring to the jackfruit. Narikela is the coconut. Jambu is berries, and Adi is just an extension. So it's saying like other offerings. So he's saying in these first few words, everybody's bringing jackfruit, coconut, berries, all of these different offerings as we're all participating in this welcoming of Lord Ganapati. And this sort of celebratory aspect is also emphasized in the way he describes Sri Ganapati's walk as he's taking in this grand celebration of devotees. So in the next couple lines, he says, Ghanata Rambu Kanu Mahipai Padamunu. So Mahipai in this instance is referring to the earth, and Padamunu is referring to the way Sri Ganapati is walking. And so he says, Mahipai Padamunu Ghallu Ghallana. So that is an explicit reference in terms of like dance and like the musical quality of like the jingle-like sound. So he's essentially saying here, as Sri Ganapati is walking in and taking in the sort of offerings and the celebration, it sounds like a jingle. He creates a jingle-like sound as he is walking, taking in this incredible experience, so to say. And then in the very end of this charana, he actually establishes himself as a devotee participating. So we will see in the line, Vinayamu Nano Tyagaraja Vinuturu. So as he used Sevim Parare in the Pallavi, Vinayamu here is acting as the word for worship. And Tyagaraja Vinuturu is explicitly referring to Sri Ganapati as the god or deity that Sri Tyagaraja is also accepting and praying to. So not only does he establish the sort of celebratory festival-like aspect of worship here, he explicitly also mentions that Tyagaraja himself is a devotee participating and sort of taking in Sri Ganapati as his, god of choice as well. So he makes that reference very clear here. And yet, even in a composition that is so heavily based on Sri Ganapati, we actually see Sri Tyagaraja's bhakti for Lord Rama or Hari Bhakti coming in. And where we see this explicitly coming through is in the next few lines in the charana. So in the beginning, before he concludes with Tyagaraja Vinuturu, he actually says, Hari Charana Yuga Mulano Hridayam Bujamuna. So this line here is actually referring to Sri Ganapati himself as a devotee of Lord Vishnu. So, and that's what's so unique about this composition. As typically in kritis about Lord Ganesha that we see from other composers, there isn't this mention of Hari Dhyana or Lord Ganapati himself engaging in a Hari Dhyana. But here, Sri Tyagaraja makes that explicit when he says Hridayam Bujamuna. So Hridayam in Telugu is referring to the heart, and Ambuja is the lotus. So what he's trying to communicate here is that Sri Ganapati is engaging in his own Hari Dhyana. So despite all of these devotees sort of gathered to pray and engage in the divine worship of Sri Ganapati himself is also being a devotee here, or being portrayed as a devotee here of Lord Rama, who carries Lord Hari in the lotus of his heart. And so in this sort of reference that he's creating, Sri Tyagaraja is also establishing himself as a devotee of Lord Vishnu. As we've seen before, he's saying very clearly that he's a devotee of Lord Ganapati. Lord Ganapati here is a devotee of Lord Vishnu. And so in that sense, through the worship of Lord Ganapati, he's actually able to continue worshiping his Ishtadevata, Lord Vishnu as well. And so the meaning is so beautifully carried here, very simple words when we break it down in terms of language usage. But even in that, he's able to convey the beauty of bhakti and the celebratory aspect of divine worship so beautifully. So we will now sing the Charanam to kind of illustrate how all of these pieces connect together. Panasanarik So now we will continue this analysis with another very popular composition of Sri Tyagaraja, this time emphasizing the Devi. So I'll hand it over to Dikshita to discuss that composition.
So the next composition that we will be looking at today is the popular Kriti in Bhairavi, Lalite Shri Pravridhe. As I said, this is sung in the Ragam Bhairavi, and this composition is considered to be one of Saint Tyagaraja's Lalgudi Panchratnams, which are a very well-known set of 5 compositions that are in praise of Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati, as worshipped in the village of Lalgudi. Sri Tyagaraja pays homage to the goddess of Lalgudi, known as Pravridha Srimati, in the Pallavi of this Kriti, which we will now sing.
Lalite Shri Pravridhe, Lalite Shri Pravridhe, Shrimati Lalite Shri Pravridhe, Shrimati Lalite Shri Pravridhe, Shrimati
This composition is typically sung in a chauka kalam, or a slower speed, to draw out the bhavam inherent in the composition. The meaning of the Kriti aligns with the rendition. So in the Kriti, Sri Tyagaraja praises the goddess, but also professes his surrender to her without any hesitation. He uses Shri Pravridhe to refer to the goddess Lalita as mighty in prosperity. Sri Tyagaraja also demonstrates his devotion by describing the goddess as Lavanya Nidhimati, or as an ocean of beauty. In the ending charanam of the Kriti, Sri Tyagaraja refers to the goddess with affection, referring to her as Kannatali, or known as his mother, his own mother in Telugu. Yet, just as in Sri Ganapatini, he also shows his devotion to Lord Vishnu when he states that the goddess's brother, Mi Yanna or Mi Anna, which is older brother in Telugu, has been kind towards him, which is also Dayaku. However, in this instance, Sri Tyagaraja portrays himself as a devotee of Lord Vishnu, which has allowed him to surrender to the goddess, Tinnaga Sharanu. In essence, she too has become Tyagaraja Manasa Sadhane, or the goddess who always resides in the mind of her devotee Tyagaraja. And we will now sing the Charanam to show how Tyagaraja has worded the song to show this.
Kannathalli shubhavadane Kannathalli shubhavadane Amba kannathalli shubhavadane Amba kannathalli shubhavadane Mi annadaya kupadurane Tinnaga sharanu Joachitine Tinnaga sharanu Joachitine Tinnaga sharanu Joachitine Tinnaga sharanu Joachitine Tyagaraja Manasa Sadhane Tyagaraja Manasa Sadhane Lalite Shri Pravrede Shrimati Lavanyani Mati Lalite Shri So moving on here, we've looked at a composition on Sri Ganapati, a composition on the Devi, and the last composition that we will be looking at today is on Lord Shiva. So the composition that we are examining today is the popular composition Shiva Shiva Yanarada, Sanginda Raga Pantuvarali. So this composition is actually very simple in the meaning that it provides, but it's also so profound. And I think that's what creates the beauty of this composition as a whole. So in the Pallavi itself, Sri Tyagaraja writes Shiva 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 Yanarada, which basically translates to, it is actually a question. So Yanarada can also be interpreted as Enarada, which essentially means he's asking devotees, why can you not repeat the name of Lord Shiva? And he portrays this as a way, as a solution actually, to the fact that repeating Lord's name or Lord Shiva's name in this instance can actually help remove the bhaya, fear, or the badha, the pain that we all undergo as human beings in our own lives. And so this composition is unique in that sense, because the entire time Sri Tyagaraja is actually creating a conversation with us as human beings. So he's addressing us in this composition. And we see this in the Anupallavi and Charana as well. So in the Anupallavi, if we move to that, the very first word is Kama Dula Dega Gosi. So Kamam is referring explicitly to the idea of lust, and Pamaratvamu is referring to the idea of ignorance. So in these two words, he's actually asking us as human beings to try and give up our lust and our ignorance, and instead engage in the worship of Lord Shiva through Bilvarchana. So the lyric at the very end of the Anupallavi is Nema Muto Bilvarchana Jesi. So Bilvarchana Jesi, Archana Jesi is the actual act of engaging in worship. Archanam in the sense meaning worship here. So we actually see how he uses all of these different words. We have Sevimparare, we have Vinayamu, now we have Archana. So all of these different words are essentially invoking this idea of worship. And as we often do in our culture, Bilva leaves are associated with Lord Shiva. So he's making an explicit reference here to the act of engaging in prayer with Lord Shiva through the use of Bilva leaves. So that is what the Bilvarchana JC is referring to. And even in this Charanam, we see him sort of establishing these different acts in which we can become one with God or engage in more spiritual practices. So in the Charana, he says, Agama Mula Nutiyanchi. So the idea of reciting the Vedas or the Agamas. And Bagu Baguleni Bhashalu Chalinchi. So Chalinchi or Chalincharam in Telugu is often referring to the idea of stopping. And Bagu Baguleni Bhashalu is referring to the idea of unnecessary talk. So he's essentially stating here the idea of engaging in the reciting of the Vedas and avoiding unnecessary talk or other ways in which we can become one with Lord Shiva. And he makes it in, very explicit, like we saw in the other compositions. Tyagaraja Sannutudaniyanchi. He turns Lord Shiva, or he portrays Lord Shiva as the god that Sri Tyagaraja himself humbly bows down to and accepts. And we will see sort of in the conclusion how he brings all of this together. But that's pretty much how this Kriti is unique. As we saw in the other compositions, he's very much either engaging in a personal relationship with God, as we saw in Lalite. He's referring to the Devi as his mother and having this very personal conversation with her where he engages with Lord Vishnu and with the mother. And then in Shri Ganapatini, we're seeing this idea of celebration of worship, engaging with other devotees. Here, even though he's portraying himself as a devotee of Lord Shiva, he's addressing us as human beings. And I think that's the beauty of the composition. We have a composer who is telling us as human beings, here are some things that you can do. Repeating the Lord's name, engaging in this Nama Smarana is what will help us sort of overcome the obstacles we face as human beings. And even the Raga Bhavam and the Layam aspect. So this Kriti is typically sung in a Madhyama Kala or Durita Kala. Madhyama Kala meaning more medium speed and Durita Kalam as a faster speed. And the Raga Pantuvarali as well creates this very meditative, reflective atmosphere that we will try to portray. We will do a little bit of a Raga Alapana and then sing the Kriti to kind of bring out this meditative, reflective perspective that Shri Tyagaraja so beautifully puts together in this very simple composition, but also such a profound composition. Shiva Shiva Shivaya Narada Shiva Shiva Shivaya Narada Ori 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 Bhava Shiva 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 Yana Radha Mone Bhaya Badala Rajupora Shiva 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 Yana Kamadula de Gagosie, ye Kamadula de Gagosie, ye Kamadula de Gagosie, ye Kamadula de Gagosie, Parabhamara Parula Dhanaula Rosi, Pamara Pamaratvamu nedabasi Pamaratvamu nedabasi Pamaratvamu nedabasi Ati nemamuto bilvachana Jesi Shiva 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 Yanarada Agamamula Rutiyinchi Ye Agamamula Rutiyinchi Bagu Baguleni Bhasharu Chalyachi Bhagavatula To Poshachi Bhagavatula To Poshachi Bhagavatula To Poshachi Tyagaraja Sanutodaniyanche Tyagaraja Sanutodaniyanche Shiva 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 Yanarada Mone Bhaya Badala Rajupora Shiva 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 Yanarada So to conclude our presentation today, we just want to take a second to step back and look at all of the compositions we've discussed. So at the very surface, each of these compositions is very diverse in its own way. Each one is about a different god. Each one is sung in a different ragam, as we've demonstrated. But even in that sense, it's actually very interesting because Sri Tyagaraja portrays himself as a devotee of each of these gods. So in Sri Ganapatini, he acknowledges Lord Ganapati as Tyagaraja Vinutudu, the Devi as Tyagaraja Manasa Sadhane, and then in Shiva Shiva Yanarada, Tyagaraja Sannutudaniyanchi. And in each of these ways, we believe, in our humble opinion, that Sri Tyagaraja is attempting to show how divine worship is not defined by the deity that you are worshiping, but rather the way in which you are worshiping. And if we also look closely, each of these compositions is demonstrating a different way of engaging in this worship. So in Sri Ganapatini, it's very much portrayed as a festival and the celebration of divine worship. Whereas in the composition Lalite, we see much more of a personal connection with God, where we're thinking of God or the Devi as our mother or a father or a friend. So creating that personal connection with God. And then in Shiva Shiva Yanarada, just the Pallavi itself, the simple repetition of the Lord's name or engaging in a simple practice of Namasmarana doesn't have to be that excessive celebratory worship, but even that can help us sort of overcome the obstacles that we face in our lives. And so I think this is sort of the beauty of Tyagaraja's compositions and why we've named our presentation Tyagaraja Vaibhavam. Because at the very level, if we look at it, the lyrics are simple Telugu if we really break it down. But even in such simplicity, he conveys such beautiful and complex thoughts about how we as human beings can engage with God, and kind of gives us sort of a roadmap for how we can engage with the other people around us. So we hope that through our presentation, we were able to analyze and present the glory of Sri Tyagaraja's compositions and why he's considered to be such a celebrated composer. So we thank you for your time, and we'll take any questions now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kavya and Dikshita, for that amazing presentation. It was really informative. We do have one question really quickly in the Zoom chat. Somebody's asking, are there any consistent differences in the poetic, linguistic, or other aspects between Rama and non-Rama compositions of Saint Tyagaraja?
I would say, of course, we've only really close examined these compositions, but Tyagaraja's compositions are very diverse in the way they're written. So if we take compositions like Orangashai or Ma Janaki Betta, so all of these are in Kamboji, but these are excessive, they're very long compositions that are, sung in a very slow Chaukakalam type manner, as we demonstrated with Lalite. So in very much the same sense, these compositions, they're focusing much more on Rama, obviously. So Ma Janaki Betaga or Orangashai is more specific to Rangashai. But even in these compositions, he really focuses on building that devotional bhakti aspect. And I think that element is present in all of his compositions. Whether we take a smaller kriti like Kala Harana, which is typically Rama kriti, but smaller kriti, or a composition like Orangashai, the bhakti and the devotional aspect is still very much the same. I think the beauty of his compositions is the fact that they're so diverse in nature. So it can be something, sung very quickly or, as a smaller filler composition, but it can also be something so profound like Orangashai, where he's really taking that meditative aspect and thinking of himself as one with God. And so I think the devotional aspect is always maintained. It is just the way in which it's sung that that conveys the more meditative versus the more happy, festive type of worship.
Right. Thank you guys so much again for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.